We appreciate Deb inviting us to your conference.
Also proxy representative.
We do have quite the interesting perspective for you as far as your hands-on, in the dirt, in the water, under the trees, in the brush, working to preserve and provide habitat for all the animals, all the fauna that needs to thrive in our state. I'm gonna walk around. I'm Katy. I'm with the Oveja Project, and we began in 2018. We have a state veterinarian, Alex Eckhoff, who in her travels around the state noticed that the sheep industry is flagging in this state. And the sheep industry is quite interesting in the Southwest, as this is the first place that sheep were introduced by the Spaniards in 1542 and then again in 1598. There is scientific evidence to the notion that the first round of sheep that the Spaniards brought to the state were hair sheep as opposed to wool sheep, and numerous did escape and did interbreed with the mountain sheep. They've done DNA testing, and it points to a direct 450-year arrow pointing straight at that escape and inbreeding. After that, in 1598, Spaniards brought wool sheep to the state. Oñate did this, and there were 600 sheep walked up the Camino Real, and of course numerous of those sheep escaped and were immediately, if not sooner, scooped up by more nomadic tribes. The center of this sheep effort in the state was out around Mountain Air, in the 11 little hamlets that were in existence out around Mountain Air as the colonization and Christianization efforts worked through that place in and around Mountain Air. The inhabitants were discovered to have quite the weaving tradition. They did grow cotton prior to Spanish colonization. Cotton came northward from Mexico around 800 AD, and there were numerous varieties of cotton raised by the people there out around Mountain Air. And then as those people were subjugated, they also experienced a huge drought in that area. And that was the pivot time from weaving cotton to weaving wool in the state of New Mexico. The cotton wouldn't grow, and from 1622 to around 1670, the entire population out there dispersed and died, and then the people that were left over did disperse to their ancestral pueblos along the Rio Grande. Then all kinds of crazy things happened, but that is the burgeoning of the wool industries, because the wool was expected to be woven into cloth and sent back to Spain as tribute to the king and to the governor. So that's the nutshell history of the wool industry in the state of New Mexico. This blossomed into an enormous industry in the state, and it was subsidized by the United States government throughout the middle of the 20th century. Then, about 3/4 of the way through the 20th century, the subsidization of the wool by the U.S. government was halted. And so therefore the wool growers that had worked all this time to perfect the wool in their flocks came up with all these lovely animals and nowhere to sell their wool. So they tried to send their children off to college and get a better life for them, so to say, and not have to work so hard. So the 20th century was a huge period of change for the wool industry in the state. So Dr. Eckhoff put out a lot of feelers within the state, and immediately numerous wool producers came together in 2018 and coupled with the artistic community here in the state of New Mexico and began formulating ideas of how we can use the wool more effectively and continue to provide a life way for wool producers. So their children, these people are aging out, and so one of our goals was to include younger folks in our efforts. So we interfaced with the wool community, and we found another shift happening in the wool industry in the state of New Mexico, and we experienced kind of a bifurcated communication situation. The big producers, the producers that ran 100,000 ewes in the past across our lands, were super reluctant to communicate with us about any way that they could improve their lands, improve their gains on their wool, or even talk about their flocks. So it's been quite the challenge to keep talking and keep advocating for this industry. We did find there is a shift occurring from those enormous flocks to small flocks. And there are numerous producers around the state that have small flocks, meaning less than 50 ewes. And I'm included in that. The communication that we experienced from the conservative community, the older community, also was fairly bifurcated. It was a sense of individualism, and then also within the tribal communities, it was religious and culturally significant issues that presented a challenge to us to talk to these folks about their wool and how they use their wool. Then we have these crazy small flock farmers that all they want to do is talk, and all they want to do is provide beautiful wool for artistic communities, and they seem much more willing to talk about conservation kinds of issues than the older ranchers and so forth. So the Oveja Project has offered a few schools on wool judging and classing and shearing. And then to hearken back to Alex's initial observation of concern for the flagging industry, we have developed an internship where we offer a 2-year program to people that want to learn artistic endeavors with wool, and then our goal is to pair them with a producer or producers at the end of their internship so that they both profit from the partnership. Most recently, we've had a really impactful relationship burgeon. We have made contact with a woman, Carlin Barris of Southern Arizona, and she has the ability to help us in another fashion, producing wool pellets from waste wool. This would be used as fertilizer as opposed to any kind of chemical fertilizer that would be laying on the land, and it's super high in nitrogen. We're looking at this particularly in the Middle Rio Grande to preserve the groundwater and lower water users in the Rio Grande system. All right, so my business is Tiwa Speak Wool, and I have about 40 ewes. I have Rambouillet, Merino, Fin Sheep, and Caracal breeds, and I cater to the hand spinning community and the fiber arts community. This flock is quite easily managed because of my unbelievably helpful husband, and we are in the Isleta Reservation. I would like to mention at this time that Isleta Reservation proper looks very similar to an hourglass, with the majority of their lands fanning out from the river towards the mountains and from the river towards the llano out by Laguna. The irrigatable land is the most restricted in their reservation. Sheep have a huge flocking instinct, and so they are also browsers. They're very similar in weight to a large antelope or a small deer, and they don't leave a huge impact on the earth with their movement. There's a huge myth that is embedded in the agricultural community throughout the state of New Mexico that sheep ruin the environment where they graze. The beef industry has perpetuated this myth for eons so that they would have more access to grazing lands, saying that cattle are easier on the land than sheep are, and that's really untrue. We have a beautiful ranch in northern New Mexico, one of many, that holds a permit for Carson National Forest, Molly Manzanares, and they graze upwards of 1,000 sheep in the National Forest every year, and then bring them back down to their ranch across the winter. It's quite interesting to us that national forests allow for sheep grazing permits, whereas state forests do not. And here again, this has been quite the mindset that the sheep were detrimental to the environment, and that is just a myth. Wool is a carbon sink, and it conveys the carbon back to the soil in many forms. When wool clothing is finally tossed aside, it biodegrades over time. And another myth is that it's very inhumane to shear a sheep, and that's ridiculous because sheep have to be shorn every year for their well-being. They coexist really well with the fauna that we have around our area, and particularly in our home farm. We have ravens that use our wool in their nests. Crows, hawks, quail, pheasants, geese, squirrels, whipsnakes, jays, woodpeckers, finches, swallows, and raccoons all traverse our farm on a daily basis. We do have predator issues. I don't want to say that, it's all kumbaya and everybody's hugging one another. Coyotes and badgers are particularly hard on sheep, but we've learned to mitigate that with really well-trained and well-bred livestock guard dogs. I gave myself an asterisk here. I'll leave that for a minute. So let me say that the Oveja Project, which is a statewide project, and we include upwards of 200 people on our email list. We're ready to assist in the Middle Rio Grande with remediation of invasive plants and so forth, if that would be something that would be of service. We have shepherds that can run their flock in the river bottom and help clear fire hazard kinds of things, or just overgrown invasive species that are detrimental to the fauna that is endemic. We're ready for your needs. We're ready for you to let us know what you need to communicate to wool producers so that we can form a better relationship with you, and to help find solutions to increase endangered populations. And this is where I'll say that it was not lost on those of us in Isleta Reservation this year that there were 2 sewage breaks in Albuquerque that severely impacted the river and our irrigation this year. And accountability would be a nice thing to see. I'm not sure how that would be meted out, but it was devastating to see the number of fish and small animals that perished from those problems that we had this summer. I think that Bernalillo County and Albuquerque need to understand that they're not in isolation in their needs, and that there's a lot of farming going on that really is impacted by those kinds of issues. Okay, so my takeaways for you are the Oveja Project works towards the reinvigoration of the sheep industry, and we are looking for new and dynamic relationships for positive change. We understand that going forward in the 21st and 22nd centuries that the industry's not going to thrive unless relationships are formed between your types of organizations and our types of organizations for the betterment of all involved. And we understand that communication is sensitive and delicate. It can be super blunt, but it just needs to occur. And we're here to help you facilitate that. And thank you very much. This is my husband, Amador Lente, and he is a working farmer in Isleta Reservation, and he has a deep perspective on water usage there.
Well, I appreciate you having me come down as a Pueblo member and as a farmer. And hopefully, this is just my opinion of what life is like on the reservation, I guess. And it doesn't, it's no view of my tribal government. It's not an opinion, it's not anything that my tribal government is going to carry out in any point in time, but kind of trying to get into the mindset of the tribal people in Isleta. They want to preserve life, and our primary vision in the valley is to go ahead and follow the Creator's vision for us, or I guess the vision that was given down to us, which is all life is precious in the world. And even though you don't see what something that is living is offering to its immediate environment, I think it's precious because it was brought up on its own nature to creation for whatever purpose in this world. So we try to follow that philosophy of life, and in doing so, I try to keep the same philosophy. As I'm farming daily, as I'm out in the tractor from day to day. I guess you guys that do individuals that are involved with nature and that are involved with growing things, you kind of look at those things and you see the animals around you. You see all the special things that nobody sees every day. I in the nighttime I find porcupines foraging out in the alfalfa fields. I guess they're looking for whatever the porcupines eat. I don't get close enough to them to really see what's out there that they're eating. But I respect them enough to know that I don't understand them, so I leave it up to them to go about their business. And I think that in that respect, if you don't understand something, it's best you leave it alone. The old people used to say, leave it up to their own devices and try to give it enough room to survive. And the gentleman before me was talking about the silvery mineral in the river and how it's an endangered species. I think there are several endangered species that live within the Pueblo. I don't know. I don't think my tribe would appreciate me telling you what's out there because, we want to keep it to ourselves. And plus, the encroachment doesn't lend itself to giving life to these animals. And sometimes when you go onto the Pueblo, you see fallow land. And our philosophy of fallow land is that something is living on that land. You might not be nurturing it, or you might not see it on a daily basis, but it's there for a purpose. It's there for a reason. And there was an individual that was an engineer that came to me, and I have a piece of land just south of the dam there in Isleta, and it seems like it's vacant. It seems like there's nothing growing on it. They told me, why don't you put that land into production? I said, yeah, I might put that land into production one of these days, you know. And I've just been thinking about what I'm going to put into it. But it's not really, it's not important. My dad would always tell me, someday we'll do something. And I still tell myself that today, someday, you know, I'm going to do something with it. But the animals, the smaller animals are doing something with it because they're living there, they're producing their offspring, they're thriving. And for me to take away that habitat from them is not, it's not right. So in that respect, I feel that I'm a nurturer of life. And I think that each one of you out here today should be thinking about how we're nurturing life, how each one of you are nurturing life in the valley. And my way was taught to me by my dad. My dad was a Vietnam veteran, and he went to Vietnam in 69 and 70, and he experienced a lot of crazy things. He's seen a lot of death, a lot of destruction, a lot of things that our military can do to other people against their will, and I guess they're fighting us against, you know, way of life. We're putting two sets of ideas together, and we're pitting them against each other, and we're saying that we're stronger and we can overcome these things. But as individuals, I would just like to say that when my dad came back from Vietnam, he didn't want that kind of exposure for us as children, and he was trying to nurture us in life. And so he always instilled in us that everything has its place in the world, and we should nurture life that way. And so, in doing so, in my farming practices, I always try to promote the habitat of little animals along my fence rows, along my borders. I try to use the least amount of insecticides. I try to use crop rotation as much as I can, and I try to reduce the use of fertilizers. And you know what my wife touched on before about the sewage leak that occurred in Albuquerque this past summer. I had to pick up syringes from a certain field just north of the Pueblo there with a big stick and a 5-gallon bucket. And if other farmers have to do that outside of the reservation, I think they would be upset because there's a lot of implications to that. You know, our society north of us is sick, and we're not looking at the true nature of helping people get over our drug addictions and other things. And so it's spilling onto all of us. It's spilling onto the Pueblo. It's spilling onto all of our lives, really, you know. And I just like for us to think about all those things. I think if you don't take anything away from my talk, I would like to ask you, those of you that have children, how you would like to raise your children in the valley. And would you like them to be in chaos and uncertainty? Or would you like them to have stability and a foundation that will last into the future? So I ask you, and I ask you to think about the silvery minnow as an endangered species to kind of find a way to help it. And as my culture, I think my culture is endangered also. So if we can put a little bit of water into the river and give that minnow its share of water so that it can survive, I think you can give us our little portion of the valley and help us by preserving us, and our way of life. Just as my father fought to preserve a way of life, and to protect the Constitution, I guess, as we kind of interpret it, So I would hope that if somebody is doing something detrimental to the environment, that we would stop them and we would think and we would act together accordingly. And so I hope that in the future we can work with MRGCB and all the entities that are on the river to help keep the flow of water going to those people who need it. And I appreciate your time and effort this morning, and your attendance and your ear. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Katy and Amador. So the reason we asked the Lentes to come talk is, as an ecosystem approach, we have to consider not just the scale, the temporal scale and the spatial scale, but also the social scale of what we're doing. So we have to realize that there are impacts to the management that you're doing at the small local farmers level, but also there's opportunities, as Katy mentioned. So with that, I'm going to open up for 1 or 2 questions. I know we're running a little behind schedule. Any questions?
Debbie, thank you for speaking to us today. I really appreciate your perspective and learning about the work you've been doing. I guess, so my question is, I guess as farmers, there's a need to be able to be adaptive into situations. With the hydrology forecasted to decrease over, into the future, what are your plans to adapt, or what are your concerns? How would you face that situation that we're all facing?
Is it for me?
Whoever.
Okay. Well, I think that as a tribe as a whole, we have small vegetable farms that are trying to adapt to the change of the times. They were affected by the flow of the river when the sewage break happened. So they're trying to put in wells and like solar wells and adapt to drip irrigation. I'm not sure if we can do that as far as an alfalfa farmer. We're farming about 8,000 acres there, or roughly somewhere around there in Isleta. And I feel that as time goes on, we'll all have to change. And those resources, those natural resources are finite. And I understand that our portion of that resource is undefined. And if you ask yourself, I think there's always an expectation for us, or there's an imposed view in my position as a tribal member, that there's always a limitation imposed on tribes on what they can do with their water and their resources. When I speak to entities like MRGCD or something like that, they're always saying, well, you have this amount of water, and at the end of the year, it's always to that 0 point. It's pointed out that at the end of the year, there's nothing left over of your prior and paramount water. So in the new year, when we start out, there's always a question mark in your head. What do we have as a tribal member? How big of that pie do you get? Maybe you might not even get a slice of pie this year. You know what I mean? But I understand there's guarantees built into those compacts, but you can't help but think that you're always coming to the table at a disadvantage. When those water compacts are made, as to my understanding, I don't see anybody sitting there from the tribes negotiating when that happened, or I don't see names of individuals that negotiated those water compacts for the tribes, And I hate to be like this, but there's always a certain amount of apprehension with the outside, because when we walk away, we always walk away with less. So I don't want to feel that way in this day and age, because we have a lot of educated people on the Pueblo, and we have a lot of people that are advocating for us. So I hope those people that do have educations on the outside that are advocating for us, I hope they'll come and help us, hash out these things without getting into any trouble, And as far as your question about how are we trying to use our resources to the utmost is solar wells, drip irrigation. Modern practices that are scientifically proven have to be married with our older thought patterns so that we will be able to survive. As examples of survival, if you look at our tribal people and you look at the way we have evolved, we were dark-skinned people, Aboriginal-looking people, and I'm a prime example of this 500 years of contact. You look into my eyes and they're blue. They're blue for a reason, because I mixed with the outside. And my people have had to adapt to survival. We had to intermarry with your people so that we could survive as individuals, as we could catch up, So we will survive. It's just a matter of, like you saying, how will we survive? How will we use our resources together? And it shouldn't be an adversarial thing where you pit the farmers on the inside of the reservation against the farmers on the outside of the reservation. Because if we do have prior and paramount water, then that means that we're going to pass that water by the tribe, and the farmers south of us are going to benefit from it. And those farmers south of us should try to start using irrigation practices that will preserve the water, or use the water to the utmost of their ability too,
Let me interrupt you for just 1 second, Amador. I have some examples of communication that failed, or there was no communication, insofar as there are super impactful uses of water going on just south of us. We have a water bottling company in Los Lunas taking water out of the groundwater supply. And within the last few years, we have seen the growth of pecan farms. And pecans use so much water, so much water. And we just would have much preferred to have some communication and some autonomy in the development of those kinds of businesses. For us, south of us, north of us, all those kinds of things need to be discussed openly and with consideration to the Pueblos, even though folks see it as a barrier to communication.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Amador. Unfortunately, we are at time, but you guys are sticking around over lunch, and we have a panel after lunch as well. So thank you guys again.
Thank you so much for having us.